Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a geopolitical pressure cooker that's, well, always making headlines: Iran and the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly.
Our mission really is to cut through some of the noise, understand the core implications of this incredibly crucial waterway, and explore why any talk about closing it carries such immense weight for pretty much the entire world.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is how such a narrow stretch of water, something you might barely notice on a map, becomes the central point for global energy security and international relations.
Yeah.
We're going to try and unpack exactly why it's so vital and what's genuinely at stake for everyone involved.
Okay, let's get right into it then. What exactly is the Strait of Hormuz, and, why does its name always seem to pop up when we talk energy and geopolitics?
Well, it's basically the world's most critical oil choke point. Its location is key right there at the mouth of the Persian Gulf.
Right.
Think of it like
Okay.
the very narrow neck of a huge bottle. It's the only way ships can get from the Persian Gulf out to the open ocean.
The only way.
The only sea passage, yeah. And that makes it absolutely vital. To give you some perspective, we're talking about roughly a third of the world's seaborne crude oil passing through it.
A third. Wow.
Yeah, something like 20 million barrels every single day, plus a lot of liquefied natural gas, LNG.
20 million barrels a day. That's an incredible volume.
So what physically makes it a choke point? I mean, how narrow is it?
Right. So at its narrowest point, the strait itself is only about 21 nautical miles wide.
Okay, 21 miles.
But, and this is the important part, the actual shipping lanes that those huge supertankers have to use, they're just 2 miles wide in each direction.
2 miles, that's it.
That's it. And they're separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. So it forces all this global shipping into these incredibly tight controlled lanes.
Which makes it extremely vulnerable to disruption, I guess.
Precisely. It's a simple geographical fact, but it gives the strait just immense strategic importance. Okay, so given that vulnerability, it kind of makes sense why Iran frequently talks about or, threatens closing the strait. What's really behind that? Is it a genuine threat or more like a high-stakes bluff?
That's a great question. Historically, Iran has definitely used the threat of closing the strait as a form of leverage,
Leverage against what?
particularly when facing international pressure. Things like sanctions, maybe related to its nuclear program, for example. It's a very powerful card for them to play.
How so?
Well, it signals their regional power.
Right.
It shows they have the capacity to disrupt global energy supplies, which would immediately send oil and gas prices, through the roof, and that would destabilize economies worldwide. But there's a paradox here.
Okay.
While it's a potent threat, actually closing it would be, well, it would seriously harm Iran's own economy, too.
Mm.
They rely on those same waters to get their own oil out.
Right, so it's their ultimate leverage, but it's also a massive double-edged sword. I've heard analysts say it's probably more bark than bite because of that potential backlash, the self-harm aspect. Is that fair?
It's a really complex calculation. I mean, yes, the immediate economic hit to Iran would likely be catastrophic, no doubt. But the threat remains viable, partly because the potential cost of a closure to the rest of the world could be even greater, at least in the short term.
So the disruption elsewhere outweighs their own pain, potentially.
That's the gamble, essentially. It highlights how desperate such a move might be, but it still makes it a powerful, if incredibly risky strategic tool. It really forces you to think about that delicate balance of power.
Which brings us to the really big question: what if, hypothetically, what if this bottleneck actually got shut down? The ripple effects seem almost unimaginable. What would we see immediately, and then long term?
Oh, the implications would be immediate and truly far-reaching. Just imagine, suddenly nearly a third of the world's seaborne oil supply is cut off.
Yeah.
Gone. Instantly. We'd be looking at unprecedented spikes in oil and natural gas prices. Not just a few dollars, like potentially doubling or tripling almost overnight.
Wow.
That triggers severe economic instability across the globe. It could easily push many countries into recession, especially those really energy-dependent economies in Asia. Think Japan, South Korea, China. They rely heavily on Gulf oil.
Okay, so massive economic shockwaves. What about the international response? It wouldn't just be economic, surely.
Absolutely not. A move like that would trigger a swift and almost certainly a very robust international response. You'd see intense diplomatic efforts, for sure, but also well, significant military considerations would come into play very quickly.
Right, the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet is based nearby, isn't it?
Exactly. The U.S. and its allies maintain a strong naval presence there precisely to ensure freedom of navigation. Closing the strait would likely be seen as a direct challenge, escalating things into an extremely high-stakes crisis.
One of the most serious geopolitical crises imaginable, really.
Without a doubt. It's this incredibly complex dance between geography, economics, and international power dynamics that everyone keeps a very close eye on.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's crystal clear the Strait of Hormuz isn't just some line on a map. It is a critical artery, maybe the critical artery, for the global economy.
Yeah.
And any serious discussion of its closure carries just immense, frankly quite terrifying weight.
It really does. And maybe this raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. How might all the ongoing global efforts to diversify energy sources, renewables, other suppliers, or even developing alternative shipping routes like pipelines, how might that reshape the strategic importance of choke points like Hormuz in the coming years?
That's a fascinating thought.
It's a future that's definitely still being written, a complex interplay still unfolding.